All right, so today we will look a little bit into what the Create React app actually does for you. And once you run that script in your computer, that you probably did by typing this or something similar. Yeah. Something happened. A lot of things got installed. Your computer probably got a bit warm because the network went a bit crazy.
It feels to take forever.
Yeah. But for instance, one issue that you're gonna face a lot of times is versions, because there is a new version of something, and then a new version of something, and then a new version of something. That's also why last class we looked into the difference between class component and functional component, and the usage of state this way, and now it's different because versions change, which means that the documentation has to change as well. So for instance, when I ran this in my computer, I had such an old version of Create React app that was even installed in my computer. So it was very, very wrong. So I had to remove it and try it again. And for instance, when you look in Sandbox, on Code Sandbox, whenever you start a new React, if you go to your package.json, here is where your dependencies and versions are. So for instance, we can see that we have React 16.12.0 and React DOM 16.12.0, and I have React Scripts 3.0.1. But then when I installed it locally, the React and React DOM is the same, but React Scripts is already a bit different. It's a few versions up, 3 versions up. So that can change. So sometimes documentation, and you might face a problem and other person doesn't have, because it has one simple version difference, and that can cause some troubles.
But
Yes.
normally when you create a new application, they already download all the new packages to your computer.
Yeah, because now you did not install the Create React app in your machine. You use it by calling npx that calls React app, because before you used to do that. But nowadays, no, you just run npx Create React app, and then it just downloads whatever versions you need. Because, for instance, you can see here, there is that little hat before the version, but this one doesn't have it. Which means that if React sends a new version, 16.12.1, you will have it actually installed, but you don't see it here, because this means all above, whatever, if there is anything above this, installed. And this one means I want exactly this version. So sometimes problems might happen because of versionings. But there's no way to solve it. It's just you need to figure out what happened. Now, the Create React app installs this, as you can see, this React scripts. And when you look at your scripts part, and I don't know if you learned that you can have as many scripts as you want. So for instance, if we, am I in Git home? Yeah. Maybe I should zoom in. You can create different scripts to do different things. And as you see, now I got the hey, because I wrote, whenever I run the script, do it, then do that. And that's basically what this script does. Whenever you run, I wrote yarn, but you can also run npm run, do it. It's the same. It prints out hey. And that's basically what you do whenever you run npm run start. It tells the React scripts, run the command start. And it's just because this has the same exact name, because we could say that, for instance, run start. Now, for instance, if I run the do it script, it will run npm run start, which runs this one, which runs this one. So a lot of times you see these names, but they don't mean anything. The ones on the left side, they are just a name that you give to it.
Like a label, it's just a label.
Yeah, yeah. because the one that actually does something is this one. And the reason why we are not running this directly, right? I mean, it's no different than run npm run start. We could write React scripts start. Is because we don't have React scripts installed in our machine. We have it installed in this project, in the node modules. So it's somewhere there. I mean, I would not recommend to look into the node modules, but it's somewhere there. And that's the reason why we run it here, because this one will figure out where do we have this installed in this local project. If so, I'll figure out for you. And that's the reason why we have these scripts, but because you do not need all the scripts. So when you ran the npx create React app blah blah blah, you probably told it to again, it created this app, create React app with this name. This the second parameter is basically the name that you give to it. That's why it creates a folder with the same name that you gave there, probably. And if you look, for instance, I'm going how to show this. Okay, I'm in a folder called git-home because I ran npx. The script I ran was create React app git home. So I ran this script, which means that it created a React application inside of a folder called git home that I did not have at the time. But it also gave the name to the project. You can see on the package.json. This usually is the name of your project. You can change it anytime. For now, it doesn't mean anything. It will mean something at some point, but for now, it doesn't mean anything. Oh, no, not that. So then, when you did that, you probably ran npm run start. And then this, as you can see, it's running that script, and a lot of stuff happened. And basically, it creates a local host on a port 3000. And you can see here that you can view git-home, which is your project, on a browser, and this appears. I cannot even scroll now. This actually appears. It's part of the script that does that for you. And locally, you can access it through here, and on your network, it says you can access it through here, but I would not trust this, to be honest. Just use localhost. If you want something online on the network, use Code Sandbox, because that one creates a website automatically. And then this is a very important message. It says that the development build is not optimized. To create a production build, use yarn build. Now, again, as you probably know, there is yarn and npm. They do the similar thing. I cannot say the same, but it's a similar thing. So in a lot of places you see yarn start, yarn build. In other places you see npm run start, npm run build. You can use whatever you want. Whatever you feel better with it. I like yarn because I don't need to write the word run in between. Because if you write npm, you have to write all that stuff. If you write yarn, you can just say start. Does exactly the same thing. So it's up to you to decide.
But why in the product use yarn, not npm?
I mean, yarn behind the scenes uses npm. Yarn is just a tool that was developed to make things a bit easier, but then npm saw that, oh, somebody now is competing with us, so we need to make our tool as good as those guys. Mm-hmm. So they are very close to each other. It's just yarn has a couple of different features, basically. But I mean, you can use both. So there is no. I mean, you cannot type both in the same at the same time. That won't work. But you can use either one or the other.
Yeah, you cannot edit an image in Photoshop and Illustrator at the same time.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Now, this creates this local host, and as you probably already did in Node, you probably created a local host for the Express app somehow. And this is very, very similar. It basically is creating a server on your machine. That
we do that for database.
Yeah, and a database is the same thing because you have it locally on your machine. So you need to tell the browser or any other application that says, if you want to reach this application, you need to go through this thing here. this is no different than what you see here. That's not how a folder structure looks like. That's just like an address that says, oh, if you come to visit here, please get the contents from this folder, whatever it is. So, and this, again, it's a development build, and it's optimized for development. So it's very fast. Like if you do any change, sometimes you might not even see it. So if we go to our app.js and I remove edit, the edit disappeared from there. If I edit again, like sometimes the time of switching between tabs, it's already there. So basically this is, it's something called hot reloading that it's running behind the scenes and you don't see it. That says if there is any change to any file, reload the entire application. But again, that's why this is good for development, not for production, because you don't need Node for production on a React applications, because React is front-end only. React does not do any backend. And if we go through our folder, whenever we created, I will zoom in a little bit, when we ran those scripts, again, depending on the version you have, on the version you got from it, it probably created all these files. It created a public folder, and it created a node modules folder. The node modules is where all the dependencies are. The public is usually where most of the static things are, and by static, for instance, the icon for the page, the main HTML, and we saw this one last week. This one basically has nothing on, only the title, and then the root div where the entire application will load on. And again, it has a lot of comments here that they can help you sometimes if you need to do changes on the HTML. They might tell you what you should do changes instead of doing it here. It created these two logos that it's based on this main logo that it's on your source folder. And there is this manifest.json, which basically it's actually, if we in your application here and you see, click on manifest. Yeah, now it's not loading because I killed the server. But as you see, this is for your application to be a little bit faster. So if someone visits your website, this gets attached to their browser. So the next time they visit, the browser already knows a lot of information about your website. So it might be faster to load. It might be like the person doesn't have so many pain to load your website. And you see that a lot of times in a lot of websites. The first time you visit is really slow. It feels like, oh, nothing is loading. But then the next time, oh, it feels like it's a different website because the browser already has a lot of information about you or what you want to visit, not about you. So it already loads the website a little bit faster.
That's a file that gets cached, but if you clear the cache, then it resets to 0, or this is a different?
This is a different file. This is just for the basic information of it. The cache is for caching, we have the build of the React application, and that we will see how will that work. But still, on the public folder, there is this robots.txt, which is text. And this basically is just for the Google to be able to find your website. This is a very different topic. It's not related to React, but it's so that Google can index websites. So, and robots is basically robots that crawl the internet and try to find your website and then index it in Google. But that's a very different topic, not for now. On your source folder, again, this is code. This is usually where you work on. And there is a lot of files that probably we haven't seen before. One called service worker. And this service worker is the one that can make your application, for instance, work without connection. So some websites, for instance, Slack is one of them. If you visit Slack and you don't really have internet, it still shows the whole website. It just doesn't show new messages. Because the service worker kept all those things that you see offline. Of course, if you open another browser, it won't the service worker is not in that browser, so it does not know. But if you always use the same browser, a lot of times you see websites that's like, I have very slow connection, especially if you're on a train, and then you see like, oh, I do have connection, but no, it's just that the service worker has a lot of caching there. So he's just showing you the basic of it, basically. That's kind of what it does. Again, this service worker is more for having offline mode on, and that's something we won't work with right now. But I mean, for instance, to be honest, I never really worked with it because we don't have the use case to actually use that. So I never really used it that much. And you also see a app.test.js, and this is to write tests. Now, tests are not part of the program, but I would recommend to look into it because tests is something that verifies that your app works, your components work. So for instance, if you give your component a property name, and then you have to show that name in your component, right? This allows you to test that if I give a name, I get that name. I can see that that name gets printed, even though you don't have to run the browser or anything. You just run a couple of scripts. So that makes sure that your components work with giving props. But again, test is almost its own subject that we could talk about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. But whenever you install React, it comes with it. So
can you give an example for this one? The small one.
Yeah, for instance, the test is already written whenever you install React.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this app.js, and then you have this test. And this test, I can actually explain it. So basically it's saying that, render the app, and you can see the app comes from there, which is there, right? And then I want to, and this is actually a naming of this library, and it's called testing library. It's a very easy name. That says get by text, and then it tries to find this text inside of that app. And then tests are very, or in this case, unit tests are very like, I expect something to happen. That's usually the names of it. That's why you have the word expect, the link element, to be in the document. So, and that's the only thing we are testing. We render the app, and we select the words learn React. I expect it to be in a document. That's kind of what is written there.
And how you run that?
With the scripts, as I showed here. So there is a script for start, a script for build, and a script for test. That basically runs React script test. So if we try yarn test, and then it shows this pop-up message so that you can actually write something and then run tests again. Like also, it's not really hot reloading like the website, but it's a bit similar. But then we say run all tests, and it said it passed, because when you look at what you're asking, we want this text to be here. This text is here, right? Now, what will happen if we remove this? Now it failed, and it shows here one test failed out of one test, because there's only one test. And then it shows exactly this didn't work because this text does not exist anywhere on a website. So, and again, tests are something that a lot of people do not like to write, but I would advise to look into it at least. Again, it's not part of the program, but it's really something you should search for it. And also, especially this library testing, called testing library, it's really good, and it has very good tutorials of how to test your components and whatever. But again, whenever you install a new React application, this already comes in together with this file called setup tests, which is, as it says here on the documentation, is basically you need to have this on your application so your tests can run. It's just a helper file that needs to be there. But for instance, this test.js, the users that visit your website will not see this, because this should not be should not make the website slow just because you want to test. This this will not be part of the production. Again, that's why we have production and development. And again, development is what we ran what we did when we ran yarn start. Wait, let me just clear this. Yarn start. This starts the development server. This starts the local host, and yeah, it just refreshed, and now you can see that now there is no more errors, and all the icons are here. Whatever. Now it says here to create a production build, use yarn build. So we will just use yarn build or npm run build, same thing. So this does a bunch of stuff as well, and usually it gives you like interesting information. And in here it even tells you like as you can how to host it and how to control your own page on a package.json. Like the whole documentation is quite good, but what we need for now is all these files that are there, and they will be in your machine when you go to your code. Now, as you can see, there is a new folder here called build. And this build folder looks nothing like your public or source together. It looks nothing like it. There is a lot of things from the public folder when you look at it, like the 5 icon, the index. But now when you look at this is the index from the build folder. This is the index from the public folder. Now you might think like, oh, they are very, very different. They are a little bit different. And one of the main differences, one is optimized to be fast. We don't care if it doesn't look good. Everything is in one line. Nobody can read it. But we want it to be fast for the user, not good for the developer, because the developer will look at the development one, not the production one. So somewhere in this file at the end, as you can see here, it's actually loading this script and a couple of more scripts. And when you look at it, it's actually the scripts that we got here. And also all our CSS, all of it. In here, we only have one file somewhere inside of the source folder. Okay, we actually have two files. But all of it got compiled into one file and optimized. So you don't have to, I mean, you should still worry, but you don't have to worry about like, oh, I have multiple files. When do I need to load one? Where I need to load the other? The React scripts does all that for you. That's also one of the big reasons why people actually use it. And if you see somewhere here, we should have in here we are pointing to get all the style sheet from here. Now, if you dare to look into the static folder, this also gets very organized inside of CSS, JavaScript, and media. And media is if you have any image or whatever. Now, there's always a file dot some numbers dot something dot and then either CSS or JS, and then one dot map. And the dot map, it's basically tells browsers where to find things. And again, this gets generated. You don't have to worry with it. If there is any problem with it, should not be your concern. It should be the tool that handles it. So, and I've never seen a problem with generating these files anywhere. And of course, if you look at the RCSS, it's also impossible to read because everything is one line, so that it's optimized as, I mean, you can probably format. Oh yeah, there is no formatter, but yes, if you want to format to see it pretty, you can, but that takes out the purpose of optimizing it. And it's the same for the JavaScript ones. It's impossible to read JavaScript. Everything is one line, and it looks like there is a lot of errors, but there isn't. It's just, this is not for humans to read. This is for the browser to understand. And yes, and creates all this stuff.
Can I have a question now?
Yeah.
So what you put in the server files to run the website? Did you put just the build?
Yeah, what's inside of the build folder.
And I put in the server, so the website's running.
Depending on the server.
Yeah, but I mean, with my work is just to make the build file.
Yeah.
And then the big file, if I put it in the server,
Yeah.
and I have access to this, everything's work fine.
Yeah, because it creates an index.html. If you have a server somewhere, you create an index.html and you put only something there, you write something there. If you can see that, then if you upload the whole build folder there, then it works. Then you have a React website working.
Okay, so I don't need to install nothing like special language or
No.
Just the build file I put in the server.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you run on your computer, it won't work because the way that the path for the assets, for instance, you can see like I'm trying to actually open the index by pointing to my local machine, but that will not work because your machine is not really a server that can run things. If you have an empty HTML file without the paths, how to show that? This is a tricky one. If the paths will be a little bit different here, then it would work, but we don't want that. And again, this is something we only do for production. The build is only for production. On your GitHub, for instance, you have something called GitHub Pages that you can use to actually host any website. And you even get like a pretty URL with your name, something. I don't really.
You can host
Yeah.
website on GitHub?
Yeah, actually, it looks like that. It will look like yourname.github.io/your app, like the name of your app, whatever name you gave to it. And this will be public for anyone. And again, but that's something we won't do here. We at the end we will actually deploy something, not today, but at the end of React. But you can do that, and you can try it on. There is a lot of tools that can do that for you.
And that is automatically this homepage. This is the GitHub webpage. It's created automatically.
Yeah, if you follow their documentation of how to create GitHub pages, yes, it will be created automatically. But again, that's not something we will look into right now.
And if you want to edit the application?
Local, always. You cannot edit anything in production. You always have to edit your things here by running start. You do the edit,
and you update that.
and then you need to commit to the GitHub so that it deploys to GitHub pages. Then, again, there is the whole flow on GitHub pages. If you read about it, there is a whole thing. It's not that easy. But again, don't worry with that. In 3 weeks, we will have to do it, or you will have to do it. So that's going to be an interesting part. But yeah, again, to run your application, just yarn start, and it will open your website. Sometimes you will see that, for instance, we can try that on. We can just create a new header.js and then import React from React. And now we're gonna have a div, and this is header. Now in here, I'll remove this image, we don't need. So now, okay, we are not using this. So it just loaded. I don't have to start the script again or things like that. Again, because we are looking into one kind of small screen, and I cannot really put things aside, but if you do changes, for instance, we can try this. If you do changes and save, then it just automatically loads on a website. But again, this is only for development. You cannot never do this for production. That would be not a good practice to do. You cannot do that.
We did
Yeah. And of course, if you have errors on your code and you are running the yarn start, let's say now we are trying to load something from something that does not exist. Usually, it's very easy at telling you what's going on. And I say usually, sometimes might not be easy. For instance, last week we saw that if we have an array of things, now here we will items.map item.name, right? Those two items are here, the names of it, but even though we have some error, and that was the error that we saw last week about we are not giving a key because we are mapping, like we have a lot of elements and we are not putting the key. That error, for instance, does not appear here because it's actually okay, but it's not okay. So again, a lot of errors, you won't see them here, but you will always see them in a console. And if you try then to build this, and we can actually just try to do it.
I do have a question about that
Yes.
key thing. I saw some videos online. So you have to give it a key. Let's say you have a list of 20 items. So each item has to have a key number.
Yeah, a unique.
Now, if you remove one,
Yeah.
right? If you remove item 5 and you add another one,
Yeah.
do they get reshuffled? Because
No.
if they get reshuffled, then you it's,
No, this key is only for React to understand what's going on, basically. And for instance, sometimes your items have IDs, right? And yeah, sometimes your items have those IDs, but I would not even recommend to use this ID because this is an array, right? And map gives us the value of each item of the array plus the key of the array. And the key of the array, we don't care how big it is. We don't care how many items it is. We don't care if we remove or add. The key will always be an array key, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. So for instance, now I will put the key here. Yeah. Oh, I probably need it here. And I will explain what I'm doing soon. And key. So now let's put them side by side. How should I do this? Oh, I will put the key and item dot ID actually. Okay, that's even better. I will make it a bit smaller just so that we can see. So even though we have an ID 1, 2, and we could 3, 4, etc., and we could agree that they are all different. They should technically be different. But again, each of these is one item in the array, and we know that there cannot be duplicated keys inside of the array. That's not allowed in JavaScript. So let's just use those instead. So we are mapping through the items. We say item 1, item 2, right? Each of this is this block. But when we map, it gives whatever is inside of the array plus the key of the array. And the key in here, we don't see it, but this one is 0 and this one is 1. So, or we can call it index as well, to be more precise with what we learned before. So in here, I'm just passing this key, and as you can see here, I'm printing the key, and I'm also printing the ID. So we have 0, 1, and 1, 2, because this one is 1, this one is 2. So instead, for instance, of using, and of course, if we had, now if we remove this, there's no problem, and there is no warning, definitely, because again, we are using the key 0. for that one. If we do this, the key is not repeated. But in this case, if we would have used the ID, we would get an error. Because now we would have two keys with the value 2. Because for some reason, we have the same one here. We had an error somewhere on our database, whatever. So that error is not reflected. Like, our application does not care what comes from up there. It just cares, like, you have an array, use the index of the array. It's way, way, way easier to handle all those things. For instance, now item.id, as you can see, there are two keys with 2, basically, because it's these 2 here. So I would prefer, and of course you can call this index, because that would be the most appropriate name from what we learned. I just call it key because then I know exactly what I'm going to use it for. I'm going to use it as a key of the element. But if you do this, it works the same and there is no errors. And again, as most of the times it's not really easy to read. But again, when you're mapping through something, or even doing a for each also gives you the index. So you will always have the value and the index of the array. So you can always use that index for whatever you want. So yeah, I would do it like this instead. Okay, so we saw the folder structure. Usually, and if you install your React application through the installing process of create a React app, usually it also creates a Git folder inside of it, so might sometimes conflict with your Git repository, because probably now I removed it from mine, yes. But that should not be an issue. What's important is that creates usually this git ignore. That, as I said before, node modules should not be part of it. And then there is a couple of them, like there is all the error stuff that usually should not be on GitHub. All the errors that your npm or yarn throw, because that can leak some secret stuff. And as you can see, the build one is also not there. And the reason is that you should never, I cannot say never, but I don't think you can find a reason to have your build on your GitHub or on your repository, because this is useless for anyone that looks at it. This is only useful for a machine that looks at it. And on your repository, like when you look at things, you do not need to have anything there. For instance, I can show, what can I show? Let's find, ooh, yeah, this is a very old one. It's a very old version of React. There's even security alerts. But as you can see here, this is a React application. And there is a folder source and public only. And then in here, there is all the components. And on a public, there, like, I deleted a lot of the stuff there because I didn't need it. But you don't see the build of it, even though I can deploy this website whenever I want. But the build should not go on your repository. And that's the reason why usually this is on a git ignore. Again, we will understand how the build will become a website eventually, but for now, do not put it on your repository. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of files and you cannot read them. Nobody can understand what's there. Okay, let me just steps. Again, in here is mentioning again the component tree, the component structure. And that's, again, that's something that, as we also talked before, that you mentioned that you had like all the items duplicated into components, and how to divide a website into component structure. And again, you said it yourself that then you wrote it down and you try to make a scheme like this goes here, this goes there. And to be honest, I think that's the only way to actually figure out what component do I need to do this, is that you need to sit down with a piece of paper and draw a website and then draw like, oh, I need a component that has a list. I need a component for the to-do. Then inside of to-do, maybe I need a headline, and maybe I need a description, maybe I need a due date. So that's something that comes out of practice, out of write down and try out different approaches. I can.
Can I ask about
Yeah.
what the difference between export default and export?
Oh yeah. So
Because sometimes you use export and sometimes you use export default.
yeah, that we can actually see with this exact example. So I will move. Can I split right? Yes. Okay. Cool. So that we can actually see at both of them. And the app, as you can see, it has an export default app. And this one, the header, has an export const header. Now, the difference between them is how we will also import them, basically. So I will write on this one an export default, so then I can show on the app how we do that. So if we say const subheader, nope. Returns a div of oh yeah, the export default has to go all the way down. Now, because this one, we are not exporting it as a name, we are exporting it as a default. If we want to use it somewhere else, it cannot come in. Like, if you actually try here to like autocomplete, it doesn't even show up there. Just for the sake of it, let's export something else. Temp. Now temp is there, right? We can import it inside of the brackets. But the subheader, even though we are exporting, it's not there. And it's because we are exporting default, which means if we want the subheader, then is here. And yeah, subheader. Okay, so weird noise. Oh, okay, I'm not running the application. Yeah, but come on. Yeah. So the subheader is there, and that's basically the difference between them. Is that if we would not need the subheader, we would do this. Sorry, the header, but we can actually. Can we add header here? Probably not. No, we would have to export everything as an object. That would not work like that. But this is basically the main difference to it. And again, a lot of times people just, if you have one component and your file only exports one component, you can use export default, but you can also use export const. And React can understand all of them.
Before I thought there's something like big difference between them.
No. For some applications, with React, no. But for some applications in JavaScript, it might need you to export a default, just so that whatever is running needs to find it somehow. But in this case, we do not need to write export default, but you can. If, like in this case, we have a function called app, we can export this function, but then we can just export default app.
And the way how you define the app by function, you are just function app. It's like
Oh yeah, this again, this is no different than this.
okay.
It's the same. It works the same.
So I can write function or I write concept app.
Yeah. Again, it's just a naming convention that this is the same. This is just a naming convention that some developers do. If you use one way, then you should not use. You should use that way all the time. So it's just so that to make things a bit more easy for a new person to look at. Like, oh, now here you have function, here you have const, here you have whatever, here you export default, here you export, and that sometimes becomes really, really hard to understand code. If again, a beginner developer might be a bit stressed, like what's going on, but again, there is standards people can put and people should follow.
Like you said, a beginner developer may become
Yeah.
stressed.
It's
No, but-
true because you know you don't understand if it's like it's an important way
Exactly.
to do it or just like optional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why sometimes development teams, they come together and then they decide on standards. Like, let's always do this standard. And you can even, there is, for JavaScript, rules that you can actually write that if you don't have that rule, then your code says something is wrong. So that everybody needs to use the same type of names, the same type of structure. But again, we won't do that here because you have so many possibilities on rules that usually it's like the whole developer in the team that decides those, and then people argue like, no, I prefer to write things this way. I want to write things this way, and then yeah,
And then, the
then
boss
people
comes,
will agree.
And then the boss comes and say, "We're gonna write it this way," and then say,
Yeah.
"Okay."
No, but it's about like agreeing on a standard, and I do understand, like, if you see function here, like, why the hell in here we are using const, and the reason why I always use const is because I'm so used to it that I cannot do anything else. And I never export default. I always export the const that I'm using.
Okay.
But again, it's just like I'm not even thinking what I'm doing. I'm just writing. So it's
Already a reflex.
yeah, it's the way that comes to my mind. It's just I export const name.
So if you put it on the top there now on the app and you put like export const app, you can just remove the last line.
Like an export default.
No, for one reason, and I'll open on the other tab. I mean, we can do it, but it will break. Because in here on index, we are actually importing like that. So for instance, if we, I'll just do this. So if we do this, how do I format code? I don't know. Okay, if we do this, our code still works fine. Now we can export this one. Works fine. There is no problem. It's just that we are exporting it here and exporting default. But now if we do this, now there is an error. And the error is because on the index, we are actually using the app, but we are importing as if it's default exported.
But you can't change it. Put
So,
just brackets.
yeah, if we put the brackets now, nothing changed here, only the brackets, and now our code works. So the only no, you cannot change the names is that you need to be aware that if you were exporting default, then other components can be importing default. So by changing that, all the components that are using that one can be affected now because they do not understand what they were trying to import.
That's why it's a good way to use one way or the other.
Yes. Yes, because if someone refactors your code, then the code breaks, then you need to figure out why. Then, yeah. Then the standard makes things.
But the new way now to write the React is all with function. They don't use classes anymore.
No, class are not used anywhere right now, nowadays.
So there's no
But-
point to look at the code to see it complicated.
Yeah, because I mean, I was looking at the curriculum, so now we're going to look into classes and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, but again, as I explained last week, and I will always try to explain how it's written in classes and how it's written in function components, because again, it's something that is good to know, to understand, but you should not do that. And one thing you probably will learn a lot in development is that there is more things you should not do than things you should do. Because there are, like, you should not do this way, and people argue different. So if you ask a different developer, he might have a different opinion than me. But I would say, like, it's good to know things you should not do. It's not that you can't, you can. There is support for it. It's just that you shouldn't use class components anymore because you shouldn't. The only reason we do it is because of state. Okay, and in that note of state, I think that's what we should work on now, on the stateful logic. How should we do this? I will use my code sandbox instead of my local one, but again, there is no difference. It's just because in there I can just duplicate code very easily, and I don't need to have all stuff installed locally. But again, there is no difference then from code sandbox to your local one. It's just that your local one, you don't need internet connection to run the code. But I mean, you need to install the app for the first time, but from there on, you don't need to run your code anymore. So can this one be seen? The colors of this one are a bit not so good. But let's try with it. So this, I made a couple of changes from last week. I just cleaned up so that now all the repositories are being loaded from the repositories component. And as you can see here, and then there is still the star there that every time we click, it increments something. Now, the thing is, even though it's true that there is state on our application now, because things change every time we refresh, and every time we click, things are changing, right? But we are only changing this part, the star, right? So a lot of times you want to change other things in your application. For instance, I will open it here so we can actually see. Okay, so you can see up there is a React app name, and that usually is the document.title. So if we say this, now it changed to my name, right? So, and now if you print it out, it's my name now. And this might be a really silly example, but this is something that sometimes we need. Who knows? So for instance, we can say, and this is a bit weird, but we can say that every time we click a star, because again, this button right now appears 3 times, right? So we will just do it here, just for the sake of it. Title, not name, title. So now if we refresh, it's React app, and now we clicked, and it's Marco. Of course, every time we click now, it doesn't update because it already is, but it is actually trying to update. Now, sometimes we might want these type of actions to happen, and the thing is, this cannot really happen anywhere else. Like, for instance, when you look at this component or this component here, there is no place to write it to say change the title, right? Because you need to wait for the website to happen first. So how to show that in an easier way? Okay, maybe if I just print it out here. So as we know, in here we can write JavaScript. If we do the brackets, this basically gives us a function that that it got printed 3 times because it is per repository. Because in here, as you can see, we are inside of the one that is being mapped. Mm-hmm. So in here we can write as much JavaScript as we want. So And this is a function, and this might be a bit weird code to see, but we can actually do this. Don't worry. It's just because if we want to have multiple lines, I mean, console log we can write in one bracket, but if we want to have multiple, then we need to open a function, and there is no name on it, but this is completely
Then you cannot call, you cannot use the number.
completely legal. It's because yeah.
But then you cannot reuse it, this function.
Yeah. We need to return it. Yeah, it's because it's not valid, right? True. Okay, then let's just do it like this. I'll do multi-line like this because this is possible to do. So this is possible, but we can also then just duplicate this line. Why not? And now, as you can see here, it prints a lot of times because we have 2 console logs and we have 3 items, so it prints 6 times, right? So now in here, we can say document dot title. It did not. Oh, it's because I should console log it maybe to see it, right? There we go. Now if we refresh, now it's here. Now we can do the thing where if we, let's just duplicate again this and say document dot title equals it changed, right? So it's because, yeah, I'm changing before I'm printing it out. So if we do the other way around, so the first one will still be React app on the first part, and then it changed the title. Now it changed to Marco. But again, this is not the best way to have your components and JavaScript code right next to each other, like HTML and all this JavaScript code. And for instance, I think you learned the fetch in order to get data, to fetch data from an API on a Node, probably, I don't know, one of them. You will have to do that in a React to actually get data from somewhere, because right now we are writing our data here. Like, this is not how things get done. So we need to fetch data from somewhere so it can be printed out. And if you do that here, it's not the place to do it. And that's why we have this called stateful logic. And as I said the other day, the life cycle, yeah, it's down here. The life cycle, okay, this one does not exist anymore. Or I hope the website is not down. No, it's just that one did not exist. Okay. So yeah, that's also one of the reasons of having the old documentation. So the class components, as I explained, in order to use state, we need to construct and then set the state to something. And then we have this component did mount and component did update that happens at different stages of when your application loads, which you can see them here. Oh, you cannot open image in the tab. Can you see it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can see it here, what's happening when your component gets loaded, basically. And that's, why does this keep happening? And that's basically what the old way of using the lifecycle would be, is that you only know that your component did mount this step. And if it updates, which means that other components told the component to update, or the component itself told itself to update, like something changed, like somebody clicked this button, now change this value, then you could only catch that value here on this. And then, of course, the unmount is when the component says, like, I'm done. Like, I rendered, and here is the HTML, and I'm done. And this one, I'm not really sure what people would use it for, but And then of course you have the render, and the render is basically where you would write your entire code inside. Where was it? Yeah, in here. And that changed by using hooks. Again, the state, as we saw last class, we use the hook called useState, where you give an initial state of whatever you're trying to do, and then you get the value of the state and the function to change the state. But there is other hooks. There is a lot of them. You can even make your own hooks, but only when you understand what most of them are, because sometimes the solution might already exist. And to get the application to be ready to use, it got simplified into one hook only. Instead of using, and I have to scroll up and down, instead of using component did mount and component did update, and in here, yeah, okay, with the example that I was giving with the document.title, in here they want to change the title again and again and again every time you click count the button. So for that you need basically these two functions to do that job, and it got simplified so that we have a use effect, and the use effect might be complicated because it has a function inside of it basically, and then in here every time that something changes this gets triggered. So for instance, I'm gonna actually copy this example and try it out. Actually, I'll try this one locally instead. Okay, yeah. So we will create a new example.js and just paste, and I will have to import React from React, not scripts, export class example, right? Is it everything? Yeah, okay. So header, let's just kill this whole thing. Example. We don't need this anymore. Okay. Come on, go away. Yeah. So basically, in this example, I need to console here. Console log. Console log. Now, if we do something, as you see, the component mount got called, and now component update gets called every time we click in. And that was basically just to set the new title as there with this state count 0. But as I showed you here, all that got simplified, as maybe you might not think it's that simple when you look at the code. I will create a file on the other side, example2. All right. Okay, why not?
We need to import somewhere too.
Why didn't it do it itself? Okay. So now if we go all the way here, okay, this is the new one, this is the old one, but they look exactly the same. I mean, they behave exactly the same, they don't look exactly the same. And to put it side by side, can I hide this? Yes, okay. So basically, as it says here, this is similar. It's not the same, it's similar to the component did mount. We have this use effect that we also import from React. Again, before, because we would create a class component, we would get all these ones. We didn't have to import from anywhere because they are part of the React class component thing. If you read the documentation, they have to be somewhere there. Can you close? Yeah. The hooks we always have to import, and as you can see here, this is exactly a import default, and this is a import not default. So in order to use both, like the combination of state and effect, which is a lifecycle, then we need to import both use state and use effect. The use state, we already saw it, how it worked. Now the use effect, in here, we can do a lot of things. For instance, in here, it says that it's updating the document title using the browser API. But if you need to actually call an API to get data, this is the place where you would do it on a use effect. Because this gets called once the application is ready to go. And you'll never, I mean, again, this is JavaScript, and as we learned from before, first the HTML gets rendered, only then the JavaScript comes in. So you kind of need to wait for things to happen. So that, but again, the wait is a very short period, it's very fast that those things happen.
But here in this use effect, you can also make a render, or we add something, or remove something.
Yeah, in here you can do basically whatever you want, but this usually it's used to manipulate something that happens on a state. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll minimize this one, and again, this is something you probably use a lot, is the hooks, and somewhere they have, I mean, they also have the rules of how you should use hooks and what you should use them for. Like you can use as many as you want, of course, but if you could combine, the better, also so that your code gets a bit cleaner and understands what's happening. They have some documentation of what happens on the first render and the second render and all those type of things. And usually on each main hook, which is the use state and use effect, I think those are probably two big ones that people use. They always have somewhere how it used to work with classes. So that, again, this is something that depends on what was the requirement for the application to work. So if some people needed to, when you click somewhere, then do something, they have one implementation. And I mean, we cannot go through all the examples of how would we use this component did mount, component did update thing.
Oh, Marco,
Yeah.
what if when you mount something, you want a different, what if you mount, you want this thing to do, and if it updates, you want a different thing to do, would you still use use effect?
Yeah. Yeah, but then you would have to use for instance, a different state to keep the value that what you want to change. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in here, I mean, in this case, actually, we would not even need the hooks, the use effect. Again, depends a lot on the case, because, for instance, every time we click here, it goes up 1. But if at some point we want to do something a little bit different, we have the value of the state. So if we can work with it, for instance, if we say like, oh, when the value is 5, show an alert, that we have all what we need here. So in this case, we do not need the use effect for anything. Again, that's usually more when it's and by external, I mean outside of this component things that happen. that would be the best case scenario for that.
Just like my question here, when you make this function handle button,
yeah,
and you pass the another function inside, it's set star, right?
No, the set star is a function. In here, I'm just passing a parameter to that function. So, I mean, again, this function we cannot see, but set star, this is somewhere is being written as and then it has this is basically what that looks like somewhere. It's just that we don't see it happening because that's what use state does. Use state gives you the value, and this is a value. For instance, if we say const current star equals star, we can actually even do this, then send current star here, because what we are sending there is the value that we want to change. That's one of the reasons why the hooks might feel a little bit more complicated to understand what's happening behind the scenes, because again, we don't have to write when we look here. In here, we know exactly what's happening, right? So we have an object called state with count 0. And then in here, we say set state count to that value. Like this one is very explicit of what we are trying to do. Because everything, like we say set state always, we cannot use any other word. And on this case, we can basically use whatever word we want. We cannot actually call this set state. Of course, we need to rename it here. Because basically this is setting the state, but of the value star in this case. And this value can be value. Can be, again, whatever we want. Why? Oh, yeah, it works. And it still works fine.
So it's about the method parameter.
Yeah, and it's the name we give. Like nobody gives the name to us. Nobody says you need to call set state. No, because, for instance, actually, before that, let me just check one thing here.
Do you have a charger for
Life cycle. Yeah. Okay. Should we make a very small pause before? Because then we will build the. We will use state and use effect in a different way.
Okay.
So we'll make a small pause now.
You did not?